I'm Jared Bowen. Tonight on Greater Boston, a conversation once thought unimaginable. This weekend, descendants of Robert E. Lee will sit down with the ancestors of people enslaved by the Lee family at the historic Arlington, Virginia house turned memorial, where that troubling history is ground into the soil. I'm joined by one of those descendants and the woman whose life's work has been spent making these conversations around race happen. Then later, comedian Alex Edelman joins me on his Boston roots, what it means to be Jewish, and what brought him to attend a meeting of white nationalists. All grist for his one-man Broadway-bound show, Just for Us, playing now in Boston. More than 160 years ago, Arlington House in Arlington, Virginia was home to about 100 enslaved African Americans. They were forced to serve the family of George Washington Parke Custis, step-grandson of the first president. He built the home in the early 1800s. It was ultimately passed down to his daughter and her husband, Confederate Army General Robert E. Lee. The enslaved didn't receive their freedom until the end of the Civil War, when many of them remained close to Arlington House, planting roots on the land that they were once forced to work. Now, this weekend, for the first time, descendants of both the Lee family and those they enslaved will gather for a public conversation at the very location their ancestors lived together nearly 200 years ago. I'm joined by one of those descendants, Stephen Hammond, who's a member of the Syphax family, whose ancestors were enslaved at Arlington House by the Lee family, as well as Susan Glisson, president and founder of the Glisson Group, a firm that focuses on cultivating healing related to racism. She's also the founding executive director of the William Winter Institute for Racial Recognition. Welcome to both of you.
Pleasure to be here, Jared. Thanks for having us.
Well, Stephen, let me start with you and ask, this didn't happen overnight, of course. This is centuries of history that you'll have a conversation about this weekend. I know there have been conversations, or especially more intense conversations over the last few years, but what did it take to arrive at this moment?
Well, it's taken a lot of patience to get here. We've been doing our family history. I have been doing our family history probably for about 50 years, and the opportunity to interact with the Lees has been something that's been on my radar screen and my to-do list and my bucket list for many years. And the fact that the house was renovated and offered an opportunity when it reopened to allow descendants to get together, to allow us to start to have conversations, really created the opportunity for us to get together. And we began talking about 2 years ago, and now we're going to get together face to face.
And you're doing this very publicly. There will be private parts of this conversation this coming weekend as well. But why is the conversation necessary, and why is a public conversation necessary?
Well, I think there's a couple of pieces here, Jared. It's important that we get to know one another because our ancestors existed in this space together. And for me, as a family historian who wants to have a full understanding of our history, bringing our families together to talk about our individual existences as our lives kind of went different directions and then have come back together in this space, I think are really important. And I think the other thing is that we offer an opportunity for our country to see a group of people who were together but separate in the 19th century and who have come back together to say, you know, we need to do a better job of speaking to one another. And in doing so, we hope to try to change the dialogue in the country as we are working to try to answer questions and work together.
Well, Susan, let me bring you in here. I've met you on a recent trip to the South. I met you outside the Tallahatchie County Courthouse in Mississippi. That's a place where you had helped to negotiate and facilitate the apology that county gave to the family of Emmett Till. You're working to bring these families together here in this situation. What is the significance of this moment in this country that is where we're so fraught when it comes to race relations, to see these two families? The Robert E. Lee name is a very heavy name, come together.
It is, and I think it's a bright spot in an otherwise polarized environment. I think it is a sign of hope. It is a sign that this kind of work, as hard as it can be done, and the rewards of pushing past the stories that have separated us, that have allowed stereotypes to develop, that have allowed us to stay apart from each other, and to, frankly, perpetuate myths and systems that aren't helpful to everyone. We can move past that if we face it honestly, if we face it together.
Susan, you explained something to me that I thought was so profound. I haven't really stopped thinking about it in the months since, which is we, as human beings, relate better to something that is shared as a narrative, as storytelling, more so than facts and figures, or there's even a neurological basis to this. What do you find when you have, what do you call it, the welcome table, when you bring people together and they just start talking?
You know, initially people are skeptical, right? I could pay my student loans if I had $1 for every time I've heard talk is cheap. But we change the way we talk with each other. We sit in a circle. There's a leader in every chair. We have conversational norms in the welcome table about how we're going to talk with each other, that include things like, when things get difficult, turn to wonder, identify your assumptions and suspend your judgment, maintain confidentiality, respect silence. We have these ways of, how we talk about things is just as important as what we say. And then we move very quickly into asking folks to share their stories, because neurologically we know our brains respond more to narrative than to facts. And in those spaces, we get to see each other in new, authentic ways. We get to see ourselves through others' eyes. We get to shift our perspective and see ourselves in another person's shoes. And that is the pathway to empathy. And once we have empathy, then we can have a revolution that's based on love.
Stephen, if you can explain how you're going into this conversation, where many people would hear it and they immediately think Robert E. Lee, statues, the Confederate flag, how can one possibly come together with the other? Do you even remotely have that conception anymore now that the two families have been coming together over this time?
Well, absolutely. I mean, those are realities that we are dealing with, and our country and our narrative is ingrained in a lot of these things. And I think as we have begun to speak about our various narratives, our individual lives, it's helped us to appreciate what we've all had to deal with. In the case of the Lees, they have, their ancestors did certain things in this country that are not necessarily how many of us believe they should have behaved, and they've had to carry that with them for generations. They're not the ones that lived that space, but they have to carry that with them. On the other hand, folks in the Syphax family, we have lifted up our lives and worked to try to change our society by doing things that can help others and to try to bring people into circles like this. And I think as we begin to share our varying life experiences, we begin to understand and appreciate one another, just as Susan was saying, so that we can hear what the other side is saying, what other people are saying. And then we can begin to work on projects and things together that we believe are important for helping to, make our lives richer and to perhaps change the world.
Susan, when you facilitate these conversations and people go to that very raw space and the history, it's not going to be removed, it's still present, but we're able to work through it. Families are able to work through it. People are able to work through it. What do you see come out the other side, as you might find this weekend in Virginia, or as you saw in Mississippi?
Well, the past can feel so confining because, of course, we can't go back and change it. But what we can do is change our relationship to it. We can learn from it. I always say that the past should not be an anchor. It should be a buoy that guides us to a better place. And so that is what I have gotten to see over 25 years in some of the places that have most notorious histories of racial violence, that when people are able to come together and speak honestly and authentically, they build relationships of trust that enable them to tell the truth about history something miraculous really unfolds, and communities that were written off come alive again.
So we see this happening on a macro level. Is there a path forward for the nation at large to understand there are lessons they can take from this?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so.
There are people around the country that probably don't know that they're part of a movement yet because they don't know each other. But I've worked in over 25 states. There are good people across the country who want things to be better, who are tired of the polarization, and who want to move forward, but maybe don't necessarily know how. And then some folks are just trying some things. And so we want people to know that there is a pathway. There are many people who are on that path, and we want to help bring people together in order to walk that path together and make a better future. We owe it to our kids.
Stephen, I know you want to answer this too, but I want to also ask you to answer that through the prism of this is happening in a very symbolic location at Arlington House in Washington. As you pointed out to me when we first spoke, this is a place that overlooks our nation's capital. So it's not only a place with a fraught history, but it's a very conspicuous place. So what's the symbolism there?
Well, the symbolism of this house reflects, the history of our country. It was built by enslaved labor. Enslaved labor helped it to run, and our country sent troops there to protect our country once the Civil War started. There are a lot of aspects of the history here that I think are important. And I think, Jared, for me, the analogy that I've been starting to use, Susan and I have talked about this a couple times, is I feel like we are in a fishbowl. This is a very iconic space overlooking the Capitol, as you said, and it offers an opportunity for people to see this group of descendants come together and ask questions about why and how did you come to this space? And for us to turn around and say, here are the things that we think are important, not only for us, but things that we think are important in terms of helping to teach a more complete history of our country and trying to get people to enter in spaces like this in a way that they can both educate themselves and perhaps start to think a little bit differently about how they interact with others.
Well, I wish you both the best in this weekend's events. You don't need me to wish the best. You're on such a fabulous path. I hope the country is paying attention to these two families coming together and what comes out of it. And there's a whole other conversation about renaming Arlington House with the Robert E. Lee name. We'll save that for another day. Thank you both for joining. And again, best of luck this weekend.
Thank you very
so
much, Jared.
Next up, you've heard the one about the priest, the rabbi, and the minister who walk into a bar. But what about when the Jewish comedian walks into a white nationalists meeting? The latter is not a setup to a joke, or at least not the way you'd think. After comedian Alex Edelman was bombarded with a string of anti-Semitic threats online, he decided to visit his harassers in person. And that experience turned into the hilarious one-man show Just For Us. Here's a little piece.
I was aware of being Jewish. I was at a children's birthday party in a old Chuck E. Cheese. I was in a Chuck E. Cheese in Watertown, Massachusetts, and I reached for a slice of pizza that had some sausage on it, and my grandfather was there, and he slapped my hand. And I went, what? And he went, you can't have that, we're Jewish. And I said, what does that mean? And he just went, it means you'll never be happy.
The Brookline native also shares stories about growing up here in Massachusetts, his Olympian brother, and understanding his Jewish identity. He's bringing the show home before taking it to Broadway in June. Alex Edelman joins me now. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
I saw you put your hand in your head for our intro.
Your
We're
intro.
not joke writers
You
here.
know what? You're copywriters. I wanna buy them an ice cream. You know what I mean?
I thought it was funny though.
No, it was funny. It was. Look, it's so interesting though because I never thought it was going to be material, and I didn't really go as I never thought it was going to be material. I didn't really go as journalism. I was just like, I was unemployed and floating around, and this is kind of like a thing I do.
So. Well, to back up, I wasn't going to launch right into the
Sure.
why
We can do it in whatever order you want.
No, we'll go there now. But How much thought did you give to this when, so to back up, I explained some of this. You were writing for a radio show, you had this string of anti-Semitic comments, and you took it upon yourself to start to learn more about them online. You found this white nationalist meeting in Queens. How much thought did you give before you went there about why you were going, what you were going to do?
I mean, like, it's so interesting because I don't want to give away too much of the show, because in the show I really get into it, but also, like, I don't totally understand people who wouldn't want to go. Like, I don't.
As a journalist, I understand that.
But not even like for and I'm sure you mean it just as a part of you, but not even professionally. Like, I want to go to things and see things so I can understand the world that I live in better and understand my place in that world better. Like, people ask me constantly, like, why I went or if I went, and it's like, I went because I am curious about the world that I live in and the place that especially in a world that is now fascinated with the sort of intersection of Jews and whiteness or non-whiteness, and so like, and how some of that seems to be internal and some of that seems to be sort of in the eye of the beholder. Like, I am really curious about the place that I occupy in America in the 21st century. So like, in the 22nd, but I won't be around for it. So, you know, like, I'm curious about those things. So I go and check out, I go to lots of stuff that I think probably would be worth talking about. And
is it your natural course of action that in some respect comedy becomes a way that you can construct it, deconstruct it, process it? You know, yes. I mean, but that approach, to me, tension and comedy are brothers. Like, you can't have one without the other, actually. Like, you may not always choose to mine one for the other, but there is comedy in every tense situation. There's tension in every comedic situation, or at least a dark irony in every comedic situation. And so, even like, why did the chicken cross the road? You know, do you know about this? I do not know about this. Do you know why did the chicken cross the road? Do you know why that's funny? No. It's a suicide joke. Did not know that. Because if the chicken gets hit by a car, it goes to the other side, but it's a different meaning of the word. It's a different meaning of the phrase other side. Like, lots of people don't know that, but from the very second that we are, you know, the very second we hear our first joke, like, you know, we are understanding tension and tragedy as a relation to it. My friend PJ says that every joke is a variation of peekaboo, which is like, I don't exist, and actually I do. Like, there is a really interesting thing about comedy and its darker relations. So yes, comedy helps me deal with things, but also, you know, like, for it started as a story I would tell my buddies. Like, I was telling my buddies about it for 3-4 weeks, and then my director, Adam Brace, I called Adam, and I told him the story, and then when I was in person with him next, we were drinking in a hotel in London, and he's like, that is going to be really good comedy. And I was like, you think? And he's like, yeah, that'll be good stand-up. So the whole thing is down to, you know, my friends like Adam and Danny and Chloe. Like, I was just telling them the story, and eventually started to make its way into stand-up. Well, the rest of the show is also about you exploring your Jewish identity, and so it all coalesces and comes together. But I was watching the show thinking this is something that somebody works a lifetime to understand, who they are, why they got their way, growing up in Boston, what that means to grow up Jewish in Boston. And so, were you already working toward that, or was this a catalyst? You know, I think first the story was a story, and then there was stand-up, and then sort of over the pandemic even, it became a sort of a useful way to, given people's reaction to the story, and my own reaction to the story, and my own reaction to elements that are mentioned in the story, or other people's reaction to elements that were mentioned in the story, I thought maybe this is a useful springboard into, you know, the show isn't about just this sort of this story. The show is about identity in the United States. And the funny thing is that it's not just a show for Jews. Like, most of our audiences are not Jewish. Most of our audiences are people who like comedy, like theater. And so, like, they come see this, and it resonates with them in a way because the story isn't just about, like, Jew goes to this meeting of white nationalists, with due respect to your wonderful copywriters. It's also about, you know, the way that people consider themselves outsiders and insiders in the society that we live in now, which sounds like a really great logline for a comedy show, doesn't it? But, you know, it's also like, and it's a jokes show. The show is all stand-up comedy that would work in a comedy club, so, you know. Well, how did you get your start into this? You came to it a little bit later than many people, I think, in terms of crafting your comedy. As I said on the air on the radio side, I was so struck by how masterful you are, how mathematical you are, and everything is so perfectly timed, how everything is constructed. You know perfectly how a joke works. I don't know perfectly how a joke works, but, like, I love the trial and error of jokes. I don't like theater shows where there's no laughter. I'm sorry,
Yeah, no, I don't like theater shows where there's not at least some fun, and I don't like fun shows where there's not at least some heft. So I started making a thing that I thought would have both. This is my third solo show. This is the first one I've done in the United States, but you know, I've done other ones abroad because I always liked that balance. I always liked a show that you could take a date to on a night out, or a show that you could see if you wanted a sort of fulsome evening of, you know, thoughtful entertainment. And so I think the intentionality of trying to make something like that helps. But yeah, I'm still learning. There's still lots that I have to. When Seinfeld came to the show, and when Steve Martin came to the show, or any of these like great comedians, I'd always ask them for notes. And the notes that they gave, I would really press them until they gave me something. And the notes that they gave were always like really incisive or thoughtful, or at least one line that went in.
Like
so,
what?
What? Sorry, what did you say?
Like what? Because I love watching Jerry Seinfeld's show, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, because
I love that show.
It's fascinating how one word can change a joke entirely.
Oh, it's amazing. He's the best comedian. He told me, he's like, you know, your generation, he's like, you guys sometimes address a response a joke gets, and he pointed out a moment that I was doing something like that and how it was pulling people out of the show a little bit. And he was right. And so I stopped doing it. And and the show was for the better. And so as a comedian, you're trained to put all of these jokes in. And sometimes the laugh that you get from a joke isn't worth the momentum that you lose moving through the narrative. So a lot of the notes I get from really smart people. Also, Billy Crystal came to see the show, and I was using a handheld microphone, like you in that clip. And this is more than a year ago. So I use one of these now, because he was like, use one of these. And I was like, I really don't want to. He's like, it'll free up your hands. You'll be able to embody the characters in a way that's more important. He's just trust me. And so he's right. Billy Crystal was right about the comedy note that he gave me. So, you know. And if you hate the show, it's co-written by Jerry Seinfeld and Billy Crystal. So please, you know.
So you also worked at the Red Sox, and actually I want to ask you, you sat next to Stephen Breyer, Justice Stephen Breyer.
Yeah.
Well, now I kind of want to know if he paid for his tickets. We kind of need to clarify all of those things. Because
actually, they were a Democrat super donor. Yeah, I met. Wait, where did you hear that?
We have a crack research staff here on Greater Boston.
I mean, I did. I sat next to. When I worked at the Red Sox, I met the coolest people. I met David Halberstam and Stephen Breyer and Cameron Diaz. You know, all the great intellect. But yeah, it was really cool. And Stephen Breyer just written a book, I think, and I have a signed copy of his book at home. We talked baseball, but I met some really fascinating people who aren't as notable. But the Red Sox was my first sort of entree into a different world. Like, I was raised Orthodox Jewish in Brookline, and so going to Red Sox games, I was meeting people who were people of color and the most Brahmin Bostonians you can imagine, and the uber working class and the uber wealthy, and like it was a really great melting pot for me that I love of sort of like I guess baseball. I think of baseball as an American religion, and it's a pretty great. And Fenway is like the best church there is for it.
Well, yeah, you made me realize that we kind of all change to some degree when we walk into the park. We're a little bit different people.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of, not to get too into this, but I think baseball is beautiful for this effect that it has. Like, the funny thing is, the games I don't even care for as much anymore. But like, there's something about the mixture, like it's urban and agrarian, right? Like it's a circle and a square, and it's a collective effort and an individual effort. Like, I can get as academic as you, and there's a natural rhythm to it, like breathing or the ocean, and like, there's something really fun and peaceful about that. And everyone's facing the same direction. And it's a game where you can talk to your neighbor, but also focus on what's happening. The game was invented for dads from the early part of the 20th century who didn't want to talk to their children. Like, that's what baseball is. And it drags forever, which is so great if you want to spend time with somebody. But like...
Well, they tightened it up now, though.
Oh, yes, they have. I went to a 2-hour... The game I went to on Sunday was 2 hours. I couldn't believe it.
That's unbelievable.
Well, I had to leave early because I had to go to the show. Like, I literally was like 25 minutes before the show. I was like, I got to get over to my theater. But yeah, I love baseball, and I love the Red Sox, and it was the first place like I sort of came of age as a Bostonian. It's like the coolest thing. And
now you're going to New York. You're going to be in a Broadway house, name on the marquee, everything, every childhood dream come true.
I'm not. This sounds so trite, but I never dreamed it. Like, it genuinely is like if someone's like, "Do you want to go to the moon?" I'd be like, "Yeah, I'll go to." Wait, what? you want to go to the moon? Are you sure you don't? Do you want to go to the moon? Be like, yeah, I'll go to the moon. And like people have been like, you must have dreamed of going to the moon. And I was like, I mean, yeah, kind of, but like, it's also like I dream of being like the Queen of Belgium or something, and you know. And so it feels very unlikely, and it's such a blessing because truly it started as a small comedy show, and so for it to sort of get such a salubrious upgrade in terms of setting is really crazy. And also the show is not to set myself up here to be embarrassed, but like the show has generally been well received. You know, critics have been kind and audiences have been kind, and people of all backgrounds seem to really enjoy it. And so, you know, that doesn't always happen. I've done different theatrical offerings, and I know way better than to take this for granted. So it's really cool. And so to do it there, I'm gonna get to do it at the Emerson Colonial, and like that's this beautiful venue I've always wanted to perform in. So like, yeah.
So that's the childhood dream, the Emerson Colonial Theater.
The childhood dream is actually to perform at the Orpheum with Ben Folds, but I don't know how to play music. And I don't even, is the Orpheum still around?
It is still around.
Yes.
So is Ben Folds.
I love Ben Folds. But yeah, I mean, I grew up here like sneaking in and out of concert. When I got to play Comics Come Home at the Garden this past fall, like that was my first comedy show I ever saw. So for me, it's like, I've had a whole bunch of like full circle moments that are just crazy. And it's the best.
Well, I loved the show. Congratulations on all your success. Congratulations on playing the Colonial Theater. That's just going to be sublime. I'm
really excited. Thanks. I'm sorry if this was a little academic, but you know.
Well, I probably did the worst thing you can do, which is to talk about comedy.
No, I love to talk about comedy. Also, lots of people love to talk about comedy. It's a really, you know, maybe just not on, maybe not on the show.
We are PBS.
Yeah, no.
Right.
Very academic and fun.
All right, Alex Edelman, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
You can catch Alex in Just For Us at the Calderwood Pavilion now through Sunday the 23rd, and at the Emerson Colonial Theater on May 20th. For tickets and more info, head to bostontheaterscene.com. Well, that's it for tonight, but come back tomorrow. Former Judge Carol Erskine will join us on the state failures she says allowed Harmony Montgomery to be placed in the care of her father, now charged with her murder. Plus, the adopted fathers of Harmony's brother on how he's doing now and how they honor his sister. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thanks for watching. I'm Jared Bowen. Good night.
Music was my life, right?